Salesforce Security Office Hours. Today we are going to be having Lillie here, the fabulous Lillie, speaking for us today at Office Hours on how do Salesforce architects design experience cloud sites that hold up against real-world attacks. Which, as we know, that's kind of why I wrote my book was because of a data breach in Salesforce digital experiences. So I myself am really excited to see what Lillie has to offer us today. Just here's the agenda as always. So we're just going to go through a little bit of the housekeeping rules, and then we'll get going with the presentation. So I always like to start as a lot of you new people know that come every week. Thank you so much. Why Salesforce Security Office Hours exists, and it's plain and simple, is because Salesforce data breaches in the Salesforce ecosystem, we'll talk about in in a second, are increasing. They are not decreasing, and we're here to drive awareness on what people can be doing, how they can be taking action right now to protect your data in Salesforce, bringing experts talking to you about important topics like Lillie here today. And so you can take that home and actually make actionable things to help protect your data at your organization. And that's really why it exists. And so we have a few rules of engagement. So first, of course, be respectful to others. It's open engagement. That's why all of you are allowed to talk. Just raise your hand or ask questions in the chat if you have a question, and then you can come on mic and we can talk it out and answer your question. And most importantly, take notes and walk away with something actionable that you can implement today. That's why we're all here. We're not here as spectators. We're here to help you, talk to you, help you understand what you can be doing, answer any questions you have after after Lillie's done with her presentation. So a little bit about me. I am Matt Meyers. I'm the CEO and founder of EzProtect and a certified technical architect with 19 plus years experience in the Salesforce ecosystem. I'm also the author of the best-selling Amazon novel, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, and a founding member of the Low Code Security Alliance. And really my mission in life is to help educate people on how you be keeping your data safe in Salesforce. So Lillie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, hello. Thank you so much. I'm Lillie. I am the author of Mastering Salesforce Experience Cloud. Do quite a bit on the UX side of the house, especially with Experience Cloud, deal quite a bit with marketing. So, I also work pretty heavily too in AI ethics. So, I was one of the authors for ECPICE, as we call it, for the IEEE for ethical certification programming. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for close to 15 years, which it blows my mind. I've done anything for 15 years, but I've been across a couple Fortune 500 companies such as General Motors, Stanley Black& and Decker, and Anthem. These days, I am a private architect for hire, so I'm a lone wolf, and I have a couple clients, some of whom are going through some Experience Cloud challenges relative to security as it stands today. But I'm also 6 times Salesforce certified, although I think one of those certs is about to go away. They just shuffled everything on us. And I regularly go present at the Dreamin' events. Sometimes I'm at Dreamforce, and I often show up for world tours and the like. And as I'm sure you probably gathered from all my World Cup talk, I am here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Awesome. Thank you, Lily. All right. So I also just want to let everyone know that the Office Hours is supported by EzProtect. So if you don't know, EzProtect delivers real-time file scanning and URL link protection and phishing detection across every Salesforce entry point. So if you have a digital experience cloud where you're uploading files and or people could be sending in malicious links. We're there to help you protect you from anything malicious that comes in from those digital experience sites. So if you're interested, there's a QR code if you want to get a little bit more information on that. All right. Just talk about last week. Who was that last week, Beach, that talked? I forget. Was it you? So Beach talked last week about anthropic mythos and really what you'd be thinking about with these AI models that are starting to come out that are offensive models, I guess, as Beach nicely put it, and where attackers' time to success in penetration environments has drastically reduced over the years because of these AI models. And so, if you want to watch more about Beach's awesome talk that he talked about this, there's the QR code that you can get to that office hours. All right, and the next thing is we always like to talk about hot off the press every week. So this session's hot off the press is talking about Clue, who was a or is a competitive intelligence company, and their app was recently breached in Salesforce. It's not Salesforce itself, just like all the previous attacks that were breached. The OAuth tokens on their side were compromised, which then allowed the attackers to gain access to all of their all those customer orgs that had not properly locked down their Salesforce REST API. And so again, Salesforce itself was never breached, but more than 10 organizations from Clue so far were breached because their tokens were compromised and the attackers were able to get access to the REST APIs. So one of the best things you can do with this is always make sure that your APIs are IP restricted. That's, I think, one of the top things you could do because the attackers, unless they can know your IP address and could fake your IP address, it's going to be very hard for them to get access to your Salesforce. And of course, always make sure you keep that your security down to the lowest possible level, not using those system admin profiles because it's easy. And that's really what's causing the widespread of these attacks is because people are not locking down their APIs. So anyway, I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about that from a digital experience side. But before we get started, I want to mention that today we have a special giveaway. So we're giving away a copy of my book randomly, and it will be given away at the end. You must be present to win. So if you're, able to stay until the very end, then we'll announce the winner of that book. All right, so I'm going to hand the mic over to you, Lily, to get started on your session.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, I really love what you just highlighted with the clue breach that just happened. Because guess what? An OAuth token, by definition, is authorized, right? Like that is something that Salesforce recognizes, represents, and is okay with. It's not Salesforce that failed here, right? It's not some sneaky attack someone figured out to get to Salesforce. No, this is bad design, leaving the door open without rotating your tokens and protecting them properly that somebody exploited. And that's kind of the whole theme of the conversation that we're about to have today. Because framing this conversation properly, I think, is really the whole idea. It's not really about going for something sneaky or going for some backdoor in Salesforce that nobody's really thought of. It's actually protecting against exposures that you may have accidentally created or exposures that really already exist. So if you want to survive in an attack, especially as you're thinking about all these very sophisticated ways people are now breaching Salesforce org specifically through Experience Cloud, design is where you're going to have to spend your time up front, and thinking about these attack vectors is where you need to go. Because again, this is not some genius who figured out some vulnerability inside Salesforce nobody's ever thought about. This is exploiting sloppy design and sloppy security practices. So let's kind of set the stage here as we take a look at it, because it kind of explains why this is ramping up and why this is so important, right? Right now, the digital experience platform market is almost $16 billion, which is up about 14% from last year. It's huge. And I'm sure a lot of you, I see a few Salesforce friends on here, are probably hearing the same thing, right? People want easier access for their customers. They want easier access for their partners. They want to make it easy to reduce time for support and security. And that's what we have to think about, right? Is all of these different vectors that we have for our different kinds of partners, our different kinds of clients, our different kinds of visitors are all now attack vectors that we can take a look at. They're all entry points into Salesforce, and some of them are not authenticated, which is the scariest part, right? Some are, some aren't, some are easier to exploit. And on top of it, we now have all this wonderful vibe coding tooling that's out there, and we are shipping these models faster than we can possibly think. I'm seeing Experience Cloud portals pop up quicker than I've ever seen them before, and we are ripe for a lot of things to go sideways with all of this, right? We've got new attack vectors, we've got faster development than we've ever seen before, and now we've also got a bunch of AI attackers that we're taking a look at as well. So it is so critical more than ever before to make sure that security is at the heart of your overall design. Can we go to the next slide, Mr. Meyers? Oh, how many of y'all have heard about shiny hunters? I feel like a few of you have if you're regulars on this show. Yeah, so shiny hunters in and of itself was, ugh. I mean, when I heard about shiny hunters, I nearly had a heart attack, and I'm very blessed that none of my orgs, thankfully, were hit by it. But there were over 1,300 orgs that were hit by the shiny hunters guest user campaign. That guest user can really, really nail you if you're not careful about it, right? So we had almost 200,000 people who were exposed in the 7-Eleven breach, and 75 million records that were exposed in the Loblaw breach too. The single most important thing on this slide, kind of like what I mentioned at the beginning of this entire talk, which you will hear me hammer constantly, is nobody sneaked Salesforce on this, right? Nobody found some mystery hole in Salesforce to come get this. Every single one of these attacks was traced back to a configuration decision by the people doing the configuration. And this is what's so important, so critical. Essentially, what these attackers did is they used a little tool, they modified it called Aura Inspector, and they did a mass scan of public sites for, shall we say, overly permissive guest user setups. Is that a fair way to put it, Matt? I think. So they weren't picking locks, they weren't sneaking around, they weren't cracking the code. They were just looking for doors that were open, and they found a bunch of them. And this vulnerability existed way before any attacker showed up because your architecture created it. Which is good news and bad news, right? Bad news that it exists, but good news in that we actually have the power to do something about it if we're thinking through it at the very beginning. Can we move to the next slide?
Sure. And Lily, I do have one question for you, but
Yeah.
how did these attackers even find these guest sites?
Using Aura Inspector, weren't they? Doing simple Googling as well, right? It wasn't too sophisticated in what they did.
Yeah, because I mean, I meant people probably don't realize, but there's a very interesting, I would say, Google search you can give you that when you put that into Google, it will give you pages and pages and pages and pages of Salesforce digital experience sites. So I'm pretty sure that's probably how they found them, and among other tools. So
Yeah,
you're not hidden. Even, you may not have, it may be a site that you don't even publicize on your website, but it is being indexed by Google, even if it's a secret site of your own. I found sites that are internal
hmm.
only for users. So,
Yep. I found a couple historical sites from people before they switched their domains as well from Experience Cloud that's easily indexed on Google. The joke I always use, and I'm sure Matt's sick of hearing me say this, is I think we have this mental image of hackers as like a guy in a shadowy closet with a bunch of green text going down the screen, and they're trying to crack codes constantly. And in reality, most attacks are really not that sophisticated, right? It's a lot of social engineering or using basic tools like Google to figure out how to invade. So I'm so glad that we brought this up as that example that we have because again, this was referenceable publicly. This wasn't somebody being sneaky, finding something and managing to worm their way into a system. This was like the door was wide open, I think is probably the best way to describe it.
oh, completely. I mean, I keep saying that, that the attackers like these, they're the best salespeople in the world,
Oh, yeah.
right? I think I need to go to Hunters and start recruiting because I mean they're basically campaigning, they're sending email campaigns, people click on the links, they get to talk on the phone with people, they tell them information. I mean, that's basically what sales is, and they're just very good salespeople.
It's shocking how easy it is to make a phone call and just say, "Oh, hey, I forgot my credentials on this particular thing. Can you just tell me what they are?" And have a baby crying in the background and nobody wants to hear a mom with her screaming baby and they'll just to get you off the phone, they'll give you whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
And I think thinking about security in terms of those terms is one, it's not the only way, of course, that people break into things, but it is kind of a major way. And this was literally just out there on Google, easy to go find.
Exactly. And I think a majority of these were done by phishing, right? A
Yep.
lot of them were. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think, but anyway, we shall continue.
Yes, yes. So we're getting too excited here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the decision that gets made before anybody opens setup, right? So there's kind of three common shapes, sizes, experiences for Experience Clouds, how we sell them, just how we say. So the first we're probably very familiar with, which is a public health center. If you're not a Salesforce nerd on the phone, I think most of you are, but if you're not, you've probably used one and have no idea that you have. There's a certain styling with the Lightning Web that you can kind of tell when you're on an Experience Cloud site if you're familiar to look for it, but a lot of very common businesses have public health centers and they have knowledge bases exposed. But the way you access those is where a lot of the fun happens and potential harm when it comes to public site is by that guest user. So your guest user is going to be your largest audience, but they're also going to be your largest risk. So you've probably experienced one of those as a consumer. You might not even know that you have. The second kind that we see a lot are partner portals. So what a partner portal is sort of like little satellites that touch regular Salesforce. So let's say you do partner sales channels. Let's say you're, own a franchise model. You can essentially build a little mini Salesforce and a little web portal for them to go through. So this is a little bit better because this is authenticated and you do have kind of rigorous permissions around it. But where things can kind of get a little sloppy and dangerous here is a if you're not careful with the way you set up your security model, partner A can kind of see partner B's data and you can have weird pollution or leaks that way. So we got kind of an attack vector there. And then finally, we have the customer community, which is sort of a blend between the help center and the partner, where you do have self-registration and record access and you do have authentication, but the similar issue exists, right? Wherein we need to make sure that we've properly segmented everybody's data away. And we also need to be really, 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 really explicit about the CRUD that we're using for which records they can touch. Because again, what happens is I've seen organizations that have all three models that are big experience cloud organizations, and they design for one threat model. They do not think about all three of those threat models. So my best advice to you is making sure that when you're designing, design for each persona and especially design for that guest user. That is the scariest, craziest, most dangerous one of all the people, right? Because I don't have Matt's clean record to go back to when there's a guest user like I would if he was a partner or even if he was in my customer portal, right? Making sure that we're designing for him is so critical, and you need to come out of the gate with that in mind. So with that in mind, permissions, right? How do we design for these things? Can you go to the next slide for me? So let's kind of get concrete a little bit about how strategy kind of becomes permission. So my thought process on this is that every interaction you promise a user will map to a permission you grant, right? And that's kind of dancey dance is where things can go a little bit sideways. So if you're saying, hey, I want you to be able to submit a case, you're granting somebody create permissions on a case, right? It's not read access to that object, right? So those are wildly different levels of exposure. And you need to very critically think about how you're granting access to each of these um, objects you have in place. It's across everything in the system at this point. You're not even incorporating sharing rules at this part. So the discipline at this point is, I would say, define the overall interaction first, and then you hear this one all the time, but minimum permissions that support exactly the interaction you are trying to have. I know it's easy when you're on a deadline, and it's so tempting just to click, read all, edit all, and go down for every little box that you have in CRUD and Salesforce. Do not do it because you will not come back to that until it's much too late. Take the time to have a very specific mentality around, all right, what is the minimum amount of work that I want this person to be able to do? And do not grant them extra things like delete or modify all. Because again, it's very, very rare for people to go back and say, oh, gosh, this is only temporary. Let me just take this away. People tend to forget about it and it becomes this massive vulnerability in the system. So build your permissions like they are forever. Because again, for all of my friends on here who have done Salesforce work, how many times have you gone back and done true permission audits unless something is blown up, right? Very seldom does it happen unless, again, something's blown up or you're in a regulated industry where you kind of have to do those things. So start from the gate with minimum access allowed. Again, I know the temptation. It's a long day. You're trying to get those Jira tickets out the door. It's so, so tempting to do them all, but please do not. Can we go to the next slide?
Yep. And one other thing I wanted
Yeah.
to, because I love that you bring up the submit a case here. And
Yeah.
so things people don't think about is, hey, and we gave the guest user create access on the case object or the contact object or something else. Well, it's great. They can't view data, but I mean, what have you seen that is problematic with just allowing them, for example, to create a case from the guest user?
Pollution, just way too many cases coming out of nowhere. Confusion, not being able to properly tie back to who's submitting work to begin with. Also, depending on how you set up your case or your custom UI, that's a Trojan horse risk. Somebody can
Yep.
very easily put a nasty little file into your system, and it's very, very difficult to trail to trace back who did that.
Exactly. And that's what I see myself a lot of times are just, things that people could do is if you have the guest user or you could create a case, make it look like a real case and put a phishing link in there. And I'm sure attackers are doing that. So if you're
Hmm.
not checking for that, another thing that is, if it's the authenticated users, you can't stop them from uploading files. So you create a case, they attach the file to the case, kind of like what you were just saying, and then you have that. So I think there's a multitude of things they should be thinking about, which is not even just the reading, but also the creation. What kind of data is coming in? I mean, maybe
Yep.
it's not malicious, maybe it's just polluting, maybe it is malicious. So I think that's things that they should be. That's I think where capture and other things help, but they still should be cognizant of those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So this is where I kind of want to break apart some of these attacks that we're talking about because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think that's a very important thing to do as we're thinking about our security. So attackers don't browse your site like a customer. They enumerate it. And here's how that works. So the attacker runs that Aura inspector. It scans those public sites. It finds hidden endpoints you didn't even know were reachable, right? Then the guest profile says, oh, here they are. They're right here. And goodbye data. The data is gone at this point. Here's the thing I want you to internalize that every standard component, every custom component, especially the custom components, ooh, we're going to have a chat about those in a minute, and every integration you add to your site just expands what an unauthenticated visitor can invoke. So you're not just adding features, you're adding more surface to attack. And so I have a little inventory rule, which is if you cannot list every component that a guest can reach, neither can your security review. And the only party who will enumerate it completely is your attacker, and we cannot let them have that complete map of your site. Next slide, sir. So this is a slide that I would like to tattoo on a junior architect if they let me, which is the data model is your trust boundary. On your left, you've got your exposed pattern, and you can point the public site directly at your internal objects, but the site inherits everything, right? Like this is a UI on top of Salesforce. That's what we got to think about, right? This is part of the body and can very easily connect to the nervous system and the rest of the body core systems in here. So it inherits everything. It's got your fields, it's got your relationships, it's got your history entities. You've taken away your internal assumptions and you've dragged them across an external boundary where they were never potentially designed to live. And we need to be very careful about how we think about this, right? So on the right, we sort of have our curated pattern, which is that internal objects need to say internal, and we need to build a purpose-built exposure layer. So when you're going through your design, think very concretely about what stays internal to your core Salesforce org and what goes external to this public site model. And make sure that only things you have determined as items that can be conceptually public, and I'm going to use that term very broadly, public to people who are either authenticated access users on your site or public users are only able to touch the public data. And this matters more than every single other decision because the data model is the one layer where one mistake can blow absolutely everything up, right? You get a flow wrong, bam, you've leaked the flow. You get a data model wrong, whole org's gone. So please curate deliberately and do not expose by default. Exposure should always be a very calculated decision and it should be reviewed and documented. That's the big one too. Make sure you document these things too. Next slide, sir. All right, so our guest user model, what does Salesforce enforce versus what do you own? So the cool thing about Salesforce is Salesforce actually has a lot of security practices in play. I think I want to give them credit for that, right? It's not as if, as I mentioned before, that someone snuck around and they found a back door. Salesforce is pretty religious about the way that they enforce their security. So secure user record access is always on, and guest org-wide defaults are usually private. So guest access only flows through sharing rules and it's capped at read. Guests can't own records, they can't join public groups, and they can't be parts of queues inside Salesforce. So again, I think most of my folks on this call are familiar with what those things are as Salesforce enthusiasts, but those are useful things to be able to keep. And it's a good floor, right? And that's saved a lot of people from themselves. It's saved a lot of accidents. However, on the right, we still have responsibility here, right? So object and field permissions on the guest profile are all you, baby. You got to handle those. And if you're not careful about them, trouble can ensue. The API enabled toggle is another one as well. The scope of every guest sharing rule is on you as well. And every Aura enabled method that a flow that a guest can reach is also on you. So I always like to say, hey, the floor is strong for what Salesforce gives you, but everything else you actually build in that room, all the furniture in the room, is your responsibility. The floor is not going to save you from breaking a chair that's going to break or, from bad piping, right? You've got the baseline that's pretty good, but as you're actually going through configuration, you yourself have to deal with this. And one of the messiest ones of all, especially in this era of vibe coding and AI, is custom UI, because you are not safe with custom UI unless you yourself are performing everything. But we'll get to that one in more depth later. Mr. Meyers, next slide.
Yep. And because this is very true to my heart and the book as well, I wanted to just double enforce that even if the API enabled toggle is off on the guest profile, they can still access your data if you've shared your data through the Lightning APIs. That means you can do everything, most everything you do with the REST API. That means you can query, you can insert, you can update records, you can delete records. Well, maybe not update that now, but I mean, you could, technically speaking, depending. If you have Apex classes, as you said, that have Aura enabled, exposed, you could get to those. You can even execute flows. You can execute Apex. You can alter the parameters of those Apex methods. Very scary stuff. And so the whole key is if on the API layer, the guest user can get to it, then so can attacker. And I think that's the key that you're trying to get across as well on this. So even though that you have that, I think the biggest misnomer is, oh, I unchecked API enabled. That means they can no longer get to the data. Unfortunately, that is not the case. So.
Great call out. Yeah. All right. So kind of a quick one, but also important. Again, I think most folks on this call know, but Experience Cloud does come pre-baked with a couple templates that can be really helpful if you're trying to spin something up very quickly and don't have very religious brand guidelines or very strict brand guidelines. But your template choice actually sets your security defaults from day one. So Help Center, Customer Service, Partner Central, build your own, all have different exposure baselines before you've even configured anything. And I think I saw Miss On pinging in here about how to set up BAs for success here. There's a temptation at the very beginning of an Experience Cloud build to say, hey, I only really care what this looks like, right? And I get it. Obviously, branding's important, customer experience is important, UX is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but the secondary question that you have to ask in addition to, well, really tertiary at this point, because one, does it do the thing I need it to do with my licensure? Two, does it look the way I want? Three should be, what does this template expose my unauthenticated traffic to? And that question almost never gets asked. And it's one that really, really needs to get asked because that kind of sets your security posture at the very beginning. So evaluate from the get-go what a template potentially exposes as well. And when you start getting into the custom framework ones, so like your LWRs or your auras, a lot of that's out the door from the get-go. But we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end because I've been on a rampage about this one lately,
Yeah,
Matt.
I mean, so just to respond to that, that's what I mean. What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
you have your BAs and your product owners make sure they ask that. And as an architect or developer, right, if you're on the receiving end and you're like, "Well, this is vague AF," push back and say, "This does not meet the definition of ready, bro. Go back, ask
Yeah.
those questions."
And security needs to be upfront, especially now with all the AI attacks that can move at paces humans could not, right? It's absolutely got to be a part of the discussion upfront. Again, I know it's tempting to only think about the way things look and to only think about, again, the baseline of, some of the licensure that comes with it and what that license covers, but that security posture is so, so critical. And that has to be a part of that earlier discovery phase and design phase. Next slide, sir. All right. So component frameworks have threat models, and every framework that you build in kind of carries a threat model with it, whether you think about it or not. Visual Force, must we baby Visual Force? I miss you so much. Legacy pages on public sites carry the oldest assumptions, and because they are so old and so stable, they often don't get reviewed as much as the new kids, right? And people forget that they're there. So make sure if you have Visual Force pages, especially maybe even ones that are associated with managed packages, that you are including those in your overall analysis as we are taking a look at it too. On top of it, we have Aura, and this is again, we've been talking about our Aura inspector for the Shiny Hunters tool that we were taking a look at. They specifically went after Aura pages. If you've got Aura on a public site, you have to make sure this is part of your review as well. And once we start getting, like I said, into these custom guys right here, most of the lift on security is on you because you can do all kinds of naughty things in all of these that you shouldn't be doing as an architect, but maybe they've come through. So you have to make sure that you're following that discipline and are checking those sites as well. LWC is modern, it's better, but you still are responsible for your field level security. You still have to validate inputs and you have to keep your event discipline really clean. It does not do this on its own. You need to enforce that in your overall design. So make sure whether it's you, maybe it's your tech lead, maybe it's your architect, are being very, very religious about their code reviews to ensure these things are done. And then finally, our LWR does actually have a little bit of security on it, hence the LWS that we see, but it enforces some namespace isolation, but it doesn't validate your inputs and it does not do the field level security for you. So the theme across all of these is, yeah, the new frameworks do help a bit. They are a bit more modern. We do have some more security in them, which is great, but they do not exempt you from checking for security flaws or making sure that you are properly shoring up your field level security, your input validation, and your sharing rules as well. So anytime customs come, there's a whole nother layer of security reviews you need to be going through.
Yep. And I also see one other thing is that some of the more seasoned veteran developers and architects tend to think about Aura and LWC as they do in Visualforce. And I think that's where some of
Mhm.
us get into trouble. We're thinking, well, in Visualforce, I mean, it was server side, so you really didn't have to worry about the data they could see if we're protect because it was protected more on the code side. Versus when Aura opened up and LWC still, it's now client side, and so now you have to think about what people can get to on the client side versus the server side. And I think that's the biggest difference where a lot of people needs to be, that I love this slide because it really thinks about or talks to you need to be considering what frame are you using for what framework, because that's going to dictate the security considerations you need to have.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I will hammer on this at the very last slide, but this is where you are the most on your own, right? This is where, again, you got that floor, but this is one of the most furniture dense rooms that you're going to be building, and you need to make sure that furniture is safe, right? All right. Oh, ScreenFlows versus Apex, right? So this is where we start to get into really dangerous stuff. And I myself have not done this. I have inherited a few sites that have gotten this wrong, and it is, oh my gosh, I'm stressed out just thinking about it. All right, which is the execution context. Do we know what we mean by execution context, right? You can essentially, when you're running an automation inside Salesforce, run it in the user context, which is within the permissions that that user has it, or you can run it in system context, which is the God mode of the system doing whatever it needs to do, right? And it is skipping all of those wonderful native security features that you have inside Salesforce with it. Now, every now and then, it does make sense to run something in system context, but if you are ever going to pull the trigger of system context, you really need to think through why you're using it and how you're shoring that up, because that is danger zone. Essentially, a guest can run whatever it is that they need to run without the protections of everything else in place. And like I said, I've inherited a few orgs throughout my career where I have seen this very sloppily implemented. Thank God none of them had a breach, as far as I know. But this very easily can blow up in your face and create a massive security leak, because what can happen is data that a user never should be able to see, or maybe even sloppy code, can create downstream impacts that you've never seen. So my rule always, always, always is run in the context of the user, and you need to have a really good documented reason when you're going to be running in system context, and you need to document it. Like I just said, make sure that it is explained, because that is so, so risky. And if you cannot explain why it needs to be run in system context, you need to rethink your architecture. This can go so sideways so quickly if you're not careful. All right, next slide, sir. So if we're thinking about designing some guest safe flows and some Apex as well, this is actually a good little cheat sheet to keep inside if you're trying to go through that decision matrix yourself. I've got 5 rules for you. So one, run guest reachable screen flows in user context unless the task genuinely can't complete without that. If it does need elevation, we may want to even do a separate flow with its own review. Don't bury elevated paths inside a normal one. Make sure these things are properly segmented out so they're easy to take a look at and manage. Secondarily, in Apex, declare with sharing and enforce your user model, please, with queries and DML. So any guest reachable code is actually still following the permissions that we set up. Because again, you might have spent all this time setting up a beautiful security model, and one bad without sharing, like all done, absolutely blown. So number 3, and this one is a huge class of attack, is never accept a record from a guest as your lookup key. Use an unguessable or generated reference, because the moment a guest can hand you an ID and you just take it without checking it right, one user can walk right into another user's records just by switching out a number. This is a very common attack vector when often you don't even see necessarily an actual user doing it, but somebody else will figure out that this is a vulnerability and figure out that they can steal somebody else's information by going in somebody else's door. So make sure you lock that one down as well. Also, I would say that you really need to limit your output variables on guest reachable flows to exactly what the screen needs. Every extra variable is just another piece of data that can be taken. So again, this goes back to that principle of minimum access, and also just kind of good design anyway, right? Give people what they're looking for, not a bunch of extra things. Not only does it make their life better, but again, it's one less thing that's theoretically indexable. And then finally, 5, treat every elevated flow and method as a named item on that audit list. Documentation is one of your best friends for these, and review it every single release. Don't say, oh yeah, we'll remember it. Write it down and review it. When we are dealing with something that can potentially be as accessible as a public site like this, we need to make sure that we are following a clear security process. Next page, sir. All right. Oh, yeah. This is a fun one if you're feeling real attacky right now. So let's talk about everything that's kind of coming in, because the door sort of swings both directions, right? So Like I was harping on earlier in this conversation, AI is taking over when it comes to attacks, and 86% of them are AI driven at the moment for phishing attacks. So the content that's arriving through your inbound channels is happening at machine scale. It's polished, it's targeted, it's cheap to produce, and it's happening at volume. So treat every inbound channel as a potential attack area, right? So think about web forms, email decays, chat, file uploads, all of it. So we've got kind of two major dangers here, right? One is that guest submitted files land inside your org and they get opened by an internal user with internal permissions. There's delivery path for somebody to access your system, right? And two is that inbound records that are fed via automation or AI could have injected content into systems that were built to trust them. So now you have a little prompt injection pathway within Salesforce with a Salesforce return address. So my rule is always validate, scan, and constrain at the point of entry because nothing downstream is going to do this for you. Once it's in, Salesforce trusts it, right? So head it off at the pass as we can. All right, next slide, sir. We've got a couple anti-patterns on this guy for you. So, one, AI enabled left on for your guest per user profile when the site does not need it. This is a big one. This is what shiny hunters use, right? API enabled is a system permission on the guest profile, and when it's on, an authenticated user can just query your data straight through Aura, or like GraphQL. Instead of just looking at the pages that you built. And so a lot of public sites, like again, those help centers, those forums, those knowledge bases, don't need it. So don't even mess with it. You can get rid of it. Number two, Aura enabled Apex without sharing or without user mode enforcement. So any Apex method marked Aura enabled can be called by a guest if it backs a component on that site. And if that site is declared without sharing, again, so many headaches over sharing without sharing, or queries it in system mode, that method executes with system access. It's not using the guest access. So the guest reaches code that can see everything, even though the guest themselves was granted almost nothing. This one makes me want to pull my hair out when I hear about it. But again, avoidable just by making sure that you set up your Aura carefully with proper sharing. So three, guest sharing rules need to be scoped to broad criteria instead of the narrow record set that the site needs access to. So guest access to record flow through user, oh, sorry, guest access to records flow through user sharing rules, and those rules could be written kind of tightly or loosely. And the anti-pattern is a rule with broad criteria: share all published articles, right? Share all active accounts, when the site really only needs like this much. So don't go so broad, right? They feel convenient. I know we've all been there, been a long night. You're trying to get that Jira ticket out the door. Don't do that, right? We want to be as constrained as humanly possible. Number four, object locked down, but those sensitive fields are still exposed because the field level security just never got reviewed, right? People often will look at the kind of object level permissions and call it a day, but especially as you're maintaining a site and growing a site and maybe adding more fields to it, you need to think through each individual field level security that you have too. Often those don't get a second look unless, again, you're in a highly regulated environment where you're having regular audits of those. I think no matter what organization you're in, especially if you're using Experience Cloud, but even with regular core too, you should be auditing your field level security. So making sure that you're very cognizant of where things are landing and doing those re-reviews as time moves on and as your system grows and expands, highly critical. So number five, system context flows that are reached by unauthenticated users, which is the same problem as the Apex one, but it's just kind of in a flow, right? So just make sure if you feel like you've covered Apex and you're good to go, that's a great place to start, but we've got flows that we have to check for as well. Then internal objects that are exposed instead of through a purpose-built exposure layer. So this goes back to, again, making sure that our data model is set up as the proper boundary from the get-go of what stays internal versus what we are allowed to put out into the external world through the vehicle of Experience Cloud. And then seven, so pre-winter 2021 sites that have legacy guest access that the newer policies never retroactively removed from you. This is a sleeper. If you are in an older org, this may be one that's gotten you. So make sure that you've actually gone in and properly addressed those legacy access requests that are in there. And then finally, no re-review after launch. I see this one all the time. So if you are an organization that maybe had a consulting partner do your implementation, or maybe you had an architect who left, make sure you are continuously re-reviewing this, right? You can't just hope that what happened, which may have very well been completely correct at the time, is still the case. You need to be doing regular security reviews. So the thread kind of running through all of these, again, like I keep saying, is none of this is Salesforce failing, right? None of this is someone finding a sneaky backdoor. Every one of these come back to architectural decisions that somebody made and nobody reviewed or nobody revisited, right? Like I said, maybe 2 years ago that was completely valid public information, but now it's not, and we just never touched it. It's so important to keep running these reviews and find them and fix them before an attacker fixes it for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to call out number 7. If you want to learn a little bit more information about that, there's a great book that is out there that I wrote that will tell you all about what happened with the guest user access and what you should be doing in your sites to remove that legacy access. Also, number 8, I love that one because this is something people are doing right now outside of Salesforce. They're called penetration tests.
Hmm.
And they typically do them annually, and they do reviewing of their organization, whether it's, by looking at the code or by actual from the outside world. And I mean, so we should be doing them as Salesforce professionals, the same thing as every other technology is doing. We should be doing them ourselves as well for our Salesforce code and configuration. So, right.
All right. So I know I use a lot of words and I speak kind of fast. If you need the TLDR, here's the TLDR slide for you, right? So I understand it's a lot to go through security reviews, especially if you're not used to it, but you kind of have to start somewhere, right? So here's what I would say that you should do in order if you can only do a couple things today, or you're still building kind of security practice. One, disable API user or access on that guest user profile. Get rid of that. Two, if it has to stay on, audit every single Aura enabled method that a guest profile can reach. Three, run the guest user sharing rule access report in the setup to see what it can touch. This is a very nice, nifty tool to see what you might have not seen beforehand. Four, restrict that data model to a purpose-built exposure layer, y'all. That is one of the biggest takeaways from this is think about how you're exposing your information. And then five, constrain every inbound channel, validation, scanning, and scoped automation where you can use it. Top to bottom, start with one, work your way on down to five. These are relatively quick things to do that will make you a whole lot safer. All right, finally, the last thing I'm going to harp on for you. You are responsible for your custom UI. And this is a thing that ever since a lot of AI coding has taken over, I have seen crazy stuff go down with. There's so many wonderful like vibe coding tools that are out there right now. And while they can spin up things very quickly, they can also do things that a human being would never do, right? One of the things I've seen since the beginning of vibe coding with a couple of my clients that thankfully we have corrected is just client side stuff doing things a human would never code, right? So you'll see calculations that look like they should have activity on the server, but they're not because all of this has been spun up in Claude for you very quickly, pushed to the site, and it looks like it works just fine. But because so much of the work is done on the client, it's just a massive attack vector for injection and for stealing information very quickly. So here's what I'd like you to kind of think about, right? Base components in Salesforce and both core and an Experience Cloud go through all of Salesforce's security reviews. Those are usually pretty safe. However, yours are not, right? You are responsible for doing that same layer of security review, and it needs to be incredibly detailed. Do not just take it at what's going on in the face value within the UI itself. Also, you can do a lot of ID injections as well, too. This is one I talked about a little bit earlier. If your component is accepting a record ID from the client, super easy to swap that puppy out and start stealing information from maybe even your competitors who may be in that system. This is also a really easy way to cheat that sharing model on top of it too. So I know sometimes folks will code around the sharing model in Salesforce. I really recommend you don't do that for two reasons. One, they can yank your license for that. And number two, again, all that beautiful work that you just put into a security model just gets completely blown up the second that you do that. So this means that like guest users will have access that they never should have in the first place. And then finally, of course, it's not going to enforce your field level security on this too. So please, 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 and I think I heard you say this in another security hour sessions with Evelyn. AI can be very helpful for turning out code, but the administrative burden that it adds is significant and it's not to be ignored. So making sure that you are reviewing any AI generated code in the system, not just for what, again, the Jira ticket is saying, but for potential security loopholes like this is so, so critical. And it's so tempting because it's so quick and it spins things up so nicely and so beautifully. But again, it's skipping a lot of those steps that a human being would otherwise take unless you've trained it to do that. And consequently, you are opening yourself up for a wide range of attacks. This is the thing I've seen the most recently with a lot of AI development that's coming down the pipe. So please, 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 if you're doing a custom experience cloud site, take the time to set up a proper security review and make sure that you are still setting up your UI to respect all that wonderful sharing and security that Salesforce has helped you create.
And please do a penetration test once you've built these digital
Yes.
experience communities or your internal code to make sure it is secure.
Yes.
The
Again,
number 5.
can speed you up really nicely, but always make sure that you have a good architect on there. I've caught a few of these gosh, about the past year and a half, 2 years, really, since vibe coding's become a thing where you can kind of tell when you look through the code, like a person didn't do this because you didn't follow the regular order of operations of things you would do in Salesforce before you even get to the LWC, right? So very, very important. And I cannot stress it enough, which is why I've complained about it endlessly this entire talk. So thank you for putting up with that.
Awesome. So next slide.
All right. So always make sure you are still actually taking a review at that site, right? It's very easy after spending weeks and months, sometimes years, right? If you're preparing a go live to call it done. No, you can't keep doing that. You're actually going to want to make sure that you're still doing security reviews as time goes on, depending on how you have your software development lifecycle set up. A good time to do this is when you're doing releases. It's also useful to actually set aside dedicated time to do security reviews, but keep those audits coming. Again, something that may have been perfectly safe 2 years ago might not be anymore. Things may have changed with your own internal org, with your own internal security. This is a never-ending story. You always have to make sure that you're keeping up on this too. And I would also recommend there's a lot of different channels for this now, but Salesforce is pretty good about reaching out to people for updates and for potential security vulnerabilities that they've come across. Make sure you're paying attention to those as well and that you're following the recommendation. I think the change from connected apps to client apps is a pretty good example of Salesforce trying to shore up attack vectors for you, but make sure that you're paying attention to the community and to any changes that the mothership is pushing down. All right, so we have a little checklist for you guys. Again, nice, easy screenshot to take home. So yes, go audit that guest user profile. We cannot say it enough. Go run that wonderful little access report. I feel like a lot of people don't know that's there, but that's the thing that you can use to make your life a whole lot easier. Look at your flows. Look at any of your oral enabled methods for their execution context. Again, treat that data model as your trust boundary. It's not just a convenience. Validate and scan all your inbound channels because those go sideways very quickly. And please, 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 please keep some kind of regular review cadence, especially for anything public. And always keep in line with what Salesforce is telling you because they will let you know if a security risk has come based off what they have.
All right.
All right, Matt, back to you.
I was going to let you say it, but
Oh,
I guess since I'm wearing the t-shirt.
you do. You do have the Smokey the Bear on here, don't you?
Yeah, so only you can prevent and contain data breaches in Salesforce, Cody, and Astro. And I think that rings very true after the presentation that Lillie just gave here. So we also want to talk about next Salesforce security office hours with our good friend, Crystal. And where she'll be talking about how do you architect trust into the Salesforce org before it's too late. I think you two should present together. It goes very well together. Maybe that's a future session as well. So that'll be really interesting. So please make sure you join for that. And just last but not least, before we get into announcing the winner of the book and also the Q&A, here are some resources for securing your Salesforce digital experiences. If you want to download or buy the book, there's a book. All proceeds go to good causes. Some more security resources, including other office hours and also security videos that we do have on YouTube. So, without further ado, I think we do have a winner for the book. Offline, Tristan had already pinged me with the winner, and that would be Anne. And so, Anne, you are the winner of the book, and Rick will be reaching out to you, and he will be sending you a copy of the book.
Oh, I think she might have just bought mine. She was
Yeah,
telling me this
and
today.
can
I
I
just bought it.
find I would love thank you. I love my name being shouted upon, but I would like to gift it back and have a re-rolling of the die, please, because I just
Well,
got one.
Ooh.
on we want to make sure we get to other people's questions. So we're still going to send it to you, Fran, and you are doing a lot in your community. So feel free to gift it to someone in your community and
Ooh,
pass it on,
There you
okay?
go.
Ooh, I love
so
that
that's a good
idea.
one. Love it.
That is
All
an
right, sorry.
awesome idea. Okay, well, we can open the floor right now for Q&A. I'm actually going to bring the first conversation point to you. You noticed you did mention in the beginning about health, like the help type of digital experience portal template, right? Where you can do a help, which is just not basically Salesforce knowledge with public facing articles and all that. I have my own thoughts about why that can be dangerous, but I'd love to hear yours first.
Yeah, so this seems like it's such an obvious one, and you would think that this wouldn't happen, but It's putting sensitive information in knowledge articles has been a fun one, or accidentally using like case summaries into knowledge that are not properly stripping people's information. I've seen that one crop up more than you'd think. And again, you would think there would be a review process or some editorial process where someone
Mhm.
says, "Whoa, don't put Matt's social security number in there because he was having issues with his account." That's a big one that I've seen actually happen. And again, you would think people would have a process for that. It's a big leak. Making sure that you're very careful about what gets published on those sites, and if there are trade secrets or sensitive information or privileged information, maybe consider putting some of those into a true customer portal that's authenticated. But that's what I've seen that I again, you would think it wouldn't happen, but it happens more than you would know.
Yeah, and that's actually the exact one I was thinking of as well, but from a little bit from a different story. So as I'm doing my research, I'll just call it that, online, of digital experience sites, I have an AI that I built that will go out in Google and search for sites and then find me the sites that have forms or allow for file uploads. Good prospecting tool for us. Well, sometimes, some of those sites are secured. There's a user and password behind it. And somehow I still find the sites that I can't get to through the user and password because my AI found a knowledge article that talked about how to upload a file behind after you've logged into their secure Salesforce portal. So I think the moral of the story here is do not show anything publicly, help article or not, that is behind a login wall.
Mhm.
That's or other information that you don't see. So your knowledge articles are being used against you by attackers. So if I'm able to easily do that, imagine what a professional attacker can do. If I can find your knowledge base articles and understand that that's going to make you a prospect for me. So remember I said, attackers are really good salespeople. So, be thinking about what you put in those knowledge articles, what you're exposing, even though it seems harmless, that could make you a target for somebody, whether it's a salesperson or whether it's an actual attacker.
Well, and think InfoSec too, right? Like there may be trade secrets that you have or design secrets. So I one of my clients many years ago was a massive manufacturing company. And so they had so much documentation about, I mean, they made millions of parts, right? Just like so many different things. Accidentally exposing a help guide can sometimes expose your IP as well too. So it's not just the theft aspect of it, it's also your intellectual property and making sure information security is considered. And again, you would think there'd be an editorial process where somebody signs off on it before it ever reaches the public, but these things can get missed. And to Matt's point, it's easy to exploit those if you are a bad guy
Yeah, most
or girl.
definitely.
Ladies can be bad
And
too, feminism.
that's true. And Beach, since you've asked several questions in the Q&A and you have your hand up, I'll let you go. I'm sure this is going to be interesting.
It was just a quick one on search when it comes to knowledge articles. So, say you create a field and you've got FLS set up so people can't access that field. Search, even the external search, will search those fields. So, it's one of these kind of weird things with search that if you put a hidden field and you put some sensitive data there or something like that, they can play essentially like Minesweeper, where you're just entering a search term and seeing which articles come back to look through those extra fields. It could be an IP address, a server name, something like that, to see which knowledge articles come back.
Yeah,
Oof.
so you're talking about like the external fields on the knowledge articles themselves, right?
Yeah, even if someone doesn't have FLS access, so even if you
Yeah.
block them all off, people don't have access to it, and you're using that for internal records, the search, even from an external unauthenticated person, can bring those records back up if it matches that term.
That is amazing. Not in a good way. Another thing
Oh,
that you were reminding me of, Beach, when you were talking, I don't know if you said it last week or one of your other various talks, was that, if you have that sensitive data that has been exposed in your org and it's on a viewable page, then it's going to be indexed by Google. And, how long does that take to go away?
Does it
And I
ever, really? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It was quite exactly of the question. So your data, your sensitive data is now in Google. So that's why it's super important to make sure that you do not expose any data because it will never be unexposed as hard as you try, I'm sure. And I know you had a question too, it looks like. How does that work for federated knowledge search? Oh, great question. Beach,
Yeah, I'm just going to drop the Salesforce Ben article. I did a deep dive on like 10 things people don't really realize about Salesforce search and security issues. So you've
Awesome.
got federated enterprise, the whole lot.
Yep, exactly. And so, do you want to address your other questions you had on the call?
I think the only main one we'll probably have time for is, Salesforce are blocking VPN access. So if a user
Oh,
or an
yes.
admin comes in, what
Yes.
about Partner Portal? Will that start to get affected?
I don't know. I would think probably, based off the framework that they've got, but I haven't run into people having as many issues with that as I had with regular users, and I myself have been running
Mhm.
into them as well since I've been very lucky to be traveling for Dreamins and have been using my VPN when that's happened, and a few people on this phone call have had to reset my user because of that.
Yep. Thank you, Patrick. That's amazing feedback.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree too. I think maybe they might hold off on it because I remember when they tried to do turn on MFA for everyone, and they turned on the MFA for the digital experience communities, and people started complaining because many of their users couldn't do that. Then they rolled it back. So hopefully the same thing will happen now, and they will kind of rethink on how they do that. So I mean, I had one customer, well, not a customer, but someone, a colleague of mine was telling me how she, she didn't have MFA on their digital experience community. It was very sensitive. They were placing orders, yet the people that were doing this were all elderly, and so not a lot of them didn't even have smartphones. So there wasn't, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do two-factor, but in a different way. So how do you account for those types of people as well? So. Anyway, it looks like we're out of time. And but if anybody has any more questions, we're happy to hold on for a few more minutes. If not, we can wrap things up. So anyone that has questions, please feel free to raise your hand or just speak up. If not, we'll
I just had one last quick one then.
Mhm.
Permission sets. So when you were talking about use cases and defining permissions per use case, when it comes to digital experiences, do you end up creating a permission set per use case, or is it a bit more granular, a bit more coarse? How do you operate?
You can do it with a couple different frameworks. I think where you kind of want to start is just identifying what personas are to begin with and sort of strip it back from there as well. And also taking a look at depending on what type of Experience Cloud you're using as well, because sometimes I think Aura allows you to do audiences, but I don't believe LWR does off the top of my head just yet. I think stripping back what each of those true personas truly is what defines how you're going to set up your overall security setup for it. So it's not a super duper clean answer for that, but I think you start from that very basic of, okay, let's just say we were in automotive and this is a dealer. This dealer is going to look like this, but within the dealership, we have, the dealer principal, for example, and then maybe we have a finance manager, for example, and then maybe we have a general marketing user who's in here or whatever the situation may be. I would say start from there and build your framework based off of how stringent those are and also what you theoretically predict may change in the future if those things do have to be expanded to.
Yep, completely agree. Completely agree with that. And I did forget one more thing. And thank you so much, Lily, for being here, for taking your time, for
Thank
making this
you.
amazing presentation that you did today. And it appears from the comments here that it is very well received.
Well,
So,
good. I'm glad to hear it. Thanks for listening to me rant about things that stress me out.
sounds like everyone has the same fears. So, anyway, I think we're going to go wrap up. We're 3 minutes past, but thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, Lily, and looking forward to see everyone on the next office hours.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon or rest of your day wherever you are.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.